Picture this: a perfectly wrapped loaf of soft, pillowy white bread sitting on a 1950s kitchen counter. Its bright red, yellow, and blue balloons cheerfully announcing its presence, promising consistency, purity, and the American dream sliced into neat, uniform pieces. For generations, Wonder Bread wasn't just bread. It was a cultural icon. It symbolized modernity, progress, and even patriotism. But the story of Wonder Bread is more than just a tale of flour and yeast. It's the story of how technology, marketing, and shifting values transformed a humble staple into one of the most powerful symbols of 20th century America. If you've ever held a slice of soft white bread in your hands and wondered how it became the default for an entire nation, stay with us. By the end of this journey, you'll not only understand the rise of Wonder Bread, you'll see how this loaf quietly shaped America's culture, identity, and daily life. Bread has always been at the heart of civilization. For thousands of years, it was baked in hearths, torn by hand, and shared in community. But in America, bread took a different turn. Industrialization and modern advertising transformed bread from something handmade and rustic into something packaged, standardized, and endlessly repeatable. And no brand captured this transformation more perfectly than Wonder Bread. Born in the early 20th century, Wonder Bread rose to prominence not just because it fed people, but because it fed an idea: progress. It was advertised as cleaner, safer, and more modern than the loaves Grandma once baked from scratch. It represented not just food, but faith in science, industry, and a shiny American future. To tell the story of Wonder Bread is to tell the story of America itself in the 20th century, its aspirations, contradictions, and eventual reckoning with what it had built. The birth of Wonder, a new era in bread. Wonder Bread first appeared in 1921, introduced by the Taggart Baking Company of Indianapolis. At the time, most bread was still bought fresh from bakeries, wrapped in paper, or baked at home. But the Industrial Revolution had begun to change food. Factories, mass production, and new preservation techniques were turning what had once been artisanal into something uniform. The name Wonder was inspired by the awe its founder, Elmer Klein, felt when watching a balloon race. The colorful imagery of balloons became the brand's visual hallmark. This wasn't accidental. It was designed to evoke joy, wonder, and the excitement of modern life. Even the packaging stood out. While other breads were wrapped plainly, Wonder's balloon logo was bold and bright, calling out to consumers from grocery shelves. By the late 1920s, Wonder Bread was already different. It wasn't just another loaf, it was an experience, a promise of something bigger. Sliced bread, the invention that changed everything. If Wonder Bread hadn't already been iconic, 1930 sealed its fate. That year, Wonder became one of the first national brands to sell pre-sliced bread, a technological marvel at the time. The phrase, "the greatest thing since sliced bread," wasn't just an expression, it was reality, and Wonder was at the heart of it. Slicing machines, invented by Otto Friedrich Rohwedder in the late 1920s, turned bread into a convenience product. No longer did families need to hack away at uneven slices at home. Instead, they had neat, uniform pieces ready for sandwiches, toast, and lunches. Wonder Bread's soft texture made it perfect for this innovation, and the company marketed it aggressively as a sign of progress. Suddenly, bread wasn't just food, it was modern engineering. Housewives praised the convenience, children loved the uniform sandwiches, and Wonder soared to new heights. Within a few years, sliced bread became the norm across America, and Wonder had cemented itself as the bread of the future. Industrialization and the promise of purity. One of the reasons Wonder Bread succeeded was timing. In the early 20th century, people were increasingly concerned about food safety. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 had highlighted the dangers of contaminated products, and homemade or bakery bread was often criticized for being unsanitary. Wonder Bread leaned into this fear. Its bright, sealed packaging reassured consumers that this bread was clean, untouched, and safe. Industrial production, once seen as impersonal, became a selling point. Machines didn't get sick, didn't have dirty hands, and didn't introduce germs. Wonder wasn't just convenient, it was scientific, sterile, and modern. This marketing struck a chord. At a time when America was embracing cars, radios, and electricity, why shouldn't bread also be modernized? Wonder Bread became synonymous with progress, as much about psychology as it was about food. Wonder Bread and the Great Depression. The 1930s brought hardship to millions of Americans. Bread lines and soup kitchens became symbols of the era, but Wonder Bread maintained its position as a reliable staple. Its affordability and availability made it a lifeline for struggling families. Even in the darkest days, when luxuries were out of reach, a simple loaf of Wonder represented continuity and comfort. But more than just feeding people, Wonder also fed hope. Its bright packaging, cheerful name, and consistent quality offered comfort in uncertain times. Families could count on Wonder to be the same loaf every time, a small but meaningful stability when so much else was collapsing. In households where every penny mattered, Wonder was the dependable anchor of daily meals, stretching sandwiches and toast further than anyone thought possible. During this period, Wonder Bread's marketing continued to stress nutrition and science. Ads promised that their bread was enriched and fortified, offering more than just calories. Parents were reassured that even in lean times, their children were getting nourishment, not just filler. This emphasis on health and consistency gave Wonder a moral weight. It wasn't just feeding America, it was sustaining it. This approach would become even more important in the decades to come. World War II and the fortification of a nation. During World War II, bread took on a new meaning. The government launched campaigns to improve the health of Americans, particularly soldiers and children. Wonder Bread became part of this mission, reinforcing its role as more than just a pantry item. It was a tool of national strength. In 1941, the U.S. mandated the fortification of bread with vitamins and minerals to combat widespread nutritional deficiencies. Wonder embraced this change wholeheartedly, advertising its bread as helping build strong bodies in 12 ways. For many children growing up in the 1940s and 1950s, this slogan was unforgettable, stitched into the very fabric of post-war memory. It wasn't just catchy marketing, it was a rallying cry for health and vitality. Suddenly, Wonder Bread wasn't just food, it was patriotic. Eating Wonder meant supporting American strength, vitality, and resilience. Families saw it not just as a staple, but as a contribution to the nation's health. Housewives buying Wonder at the market weren't just feeding their families, they were reinforcing the war effort. The red, yellow, and blue balloons on the packaging became symbolic not only of fun and joy, but also of duty and optimism in an anxious world. The 1950s, Wonder Bread as Americana. If the 1930s and 1940s had established Wonder as essential, the 1950s turned it into an icon. Post-war America was booming. Suburbs spread, television sets filled living rooms, and consumer culture exploded. Wonder Bread fit perfectly into this landscape, embodying the modern family's ideals. It wasn't just that Wonder was everywhere, it was that Wonder represented the new American lifestyle. Housewives could serve it easily, children loved it, and advertisers plastered it across television screens. Families moving into shiny new kitchens stocked their cupboards with Wonder, alongside other post-war conveniences like Jell-O, TV dinners, and boxed cake mixes. Sliced Wonder sandwiches filled lunch boxes, Wonder Toast filled breakfast plates, and the brand's balloon packaging became a visual shorthand for wholesome American life. In many ways, Wonder Bread was less about taste than about symbolism. It wasn't artisanal or complex, it was uniform, predictable, and safe. And that predictability was exactly what post-war America wanted. To open a package of Wonder was to affirm stability, progress, and belonging in a rapidly modernizing society. Wonder became more than a loaf. It became Americana itself, white bread and the ideal of purity. The success of Wonder Bread wasn't just about convenience. It was about whiteness, both literal and symbolic. White bread had long been associated with purity, refinement, and social status. In contrast, darker, whole-grain breads were often considered peasant food, or less desirable. This cultural hierarchy of bread flavors and colors had deep roots, and Wonder perfected the ideal. Wonder leaned into this cultural bias, Its loaves were blindingly white, fluffy, and almost ethereal. Ads emphasized cleanliness, health, and even moral superiority. To eat Wonder was to embrace modern refinement, to reject the old world and its rustic roughness. Wonder positioned itself not only as the bread of convenience, but also as the bread of aspiration. But this obsession with whiteness also carried deeper cultural meanings, reflecting broader American ideals of conformity, uniformity, and status. A white slice of Wonder was a signal. Your family had made it into the modern, prosperous middle class. It was food stripped of imperfection, wrapped in technology and consistency. Wonder wasn't just bread, it was a cultural statement, one that revealed as much about America's values as it did about its appetite. The critics emerge. Not everyone was enamored with Wonder Bread. By the 1960s, critics began to push back against its dominance. Nutritionists questioned whether heavily processed, bleached white bread truly offered the benefits it promised. Some accused Wonder of being more marketing than substance, a soft, airy loaf lacking the nutrition of whole grains. The enriched vitamins and minerals, while touted as scientific progress, were seen by skeptics as little more than a way to cover up what the bread lacked in natural goodness. Countercultural movements also mocked Wonder Bread as a symbol of conformity. For those rejecting mainstream America, Wonder represented everything artificial and soulless about consumer culture. Natural foods, whole grains, and back-to-the-land ideals stood in stark contrast to the industrial loaf. Health food stores began to gain traction, and small bakeries producing hearty whole-grain loaves started attracting consumers who wanted authenticity over convenience. Yet, despite criticism, Wonder endured. Its sheer ubiquity and powerful branding kept it firmly planted in the American kitchen. For every critic warning about nutrition and authenticity, millions of families still trusted Wonder because it was cheap, reliable, and omnipresent. Even as alternatives grew, Wonder remained a powerful cultural touchstone, embodying the divide between mass consumerism and the rising health-conscious counterculture. The 1960s and 1970s, cracks in the crust. By the 1960s, the shiny post-war optimism that had defined the American kitchen began to shift. The counterculture movement questioned authority, institutions, and even the food Americans ate. Bread, once a symbol of modernity, was now part of the conversation. Wonder Bread, with its machine-perfect slices and ultra-white appearance, became a target. Critics derided it as air bread, or cotton candy bread, claiming it offered little nutrition compared to whole grains. Health-conscious consumers began turning toward natural foods, a term gaining traction in the era of organic farming and back-to-the-land movements. Yet Wonder didn't back down. Instead, it doubled down on its legacy. Advertisements stressed vitamins, minerals, and the famous slogan, "Helps build strong bodies in 12 ways." For parents worried about nutrition, Wonder presented itself as scientifically fortified, the bread of progress, even if detractors mocked it as bland. Still, the seeds of doubt had been planted. Wonder was no longer just celebrated, it was also criticized, ridiculed, and used as a shorthand for mainstream conformity. By the end of the 1970s, bread had become more than food. It was a cultural battleground. Wonder represented stability but also stagnation, while alternatives suggested authenticity and individuality. This tug-of-war set the stage for the brand's uneasy place in a changing America, the rise of whole foods and countercultural bread. During the 1970s, the natural foods movement exploded. Health food stores popped up, small bakeries began championing whole wheat loaves, and nutrition experts warned about refined flour and additives. Where Wonder symbolized uniformity, these new loaves symbolized individuality, authenticity, and a return to tradition. For many, rejecting Wonder Bread became a form of rebellion. Eating dense, chewy whole wheat was an act of cultural resistance, signaling distrust of corporations and industrialized food. It was about more than taste. It was about values, community, and a yearning for simplicity in an increasingly commercialized world. This was also the period when companies like Pepperidge Farm began to thrive by offering heartier breads that appealed to more affluent, health-conscious consumers. Wonder still dominated in terms of sales and accessibility, but its image began to fracture. What once represented progress now increasingly represented industrial blandness. The cultural tide was slowly shifting. Even children growing up with Wonder began to recognize that it was different from the real bread their neighbors baked or bought at niche health food stores. Bread had become symbolic, mass-produced softness on one side, earthy authenticity on the other. Wonder had the numbers, but it was beginning to lose the cultural argument. The 1980s, Wonder Bread in the age of excess. The 1980s brought a different cultural climate. Health was still a concern, but so was convenience, branding, and mass media spectacle. Wonder Bread continued to cling to its identity as the family loaf, leaning into nostalgia and reliability. Television commercials showed cheerful families sharing Wonder sandwiches, often with the classic imagery of smiling kids and mothers proud to serve America's bread. Its colorful balloons still decorated supermarket aisles, and Wonder remained synonymous with lunchboxes across the country. But behind the scenes, new competitors and changing habits were chipping away at its dominance. Supermarket shelves grew crowded with multigrain, rye, oat, and healthy white alternatives. Consumers wanted more choice, and Wonder's once innovative uniformity began to feel old-fashioned. At the same time, soda and processed snack foods captured the national imagination. While Wonder still sold millions of loaves, its role as the centerpiece of American identity was quietly slipping. Bread was no longer the star of the table. It was a background player in an era obsessed with fast food, microwave meals, and flashy branding. Wonder was still present, but it was no longer the cultural powerhouse it had been, surviving on memory and loyalty more than innovation. The 1990s, the bread wars. If the cola wars defined soda in the 20th century, the 1990s brought what some food writers called the bread wars. Health trends and fad diets turned bread into a battleground. On one hand, Wonder tried to keep up. The company introduced new varieties such as whole wheat Wonder Bread to appeal to changing tastes. Ads tried to balance tradition with health-conscious messaging, promising softness without guilt. On the other hand, bread itself was under attack. The low-carb craze, fueled by diets like Atkins, demonized bread and pasta as culprits of weight gain. For the first time in its history, bread wasn't just questioned for its quality, it was questioned for its very existence in a healthy diet. Wonder Bread, once the hero of the dinner table, found itself cast as the villain of nutrition. Its whiteness, once celebrated as purity, was now criticized as over-processed emptiness. The cultural tide that had begun in the 1960s had now grown into a full-blown reckoning, the collapse of a giant. By the early 2000s, Wonder Bread's parent company, Interstate Bakeries, later Hostess Brands, was struggling. Declining bread sales, intense competition, and debt pushed the company into bankruptcy. In 2012, Hostess shocked the nation by announcing it would shut down, discontinuing not only Wonder Bread but also iconic snack brands like Twinkies. The news sparked panic and nostalgia. Suddenly, Wonder Bread wasn't just bread, it was memory. People rushed to grocery stores, buying loaves as keepsakes, worried that a piece of Americana was gone forever. For some, the shelves looked emptier, not just in a literal sense, but in a cultural one, as though a piece of childhood had been erased overnight. Social media lit up with stories and photos, with people reminiscing about school lunches, family barbecues, and the innocent taste of a soft slice of Wonder. But Wonder's story didn't end there. In 2013, Flowers Foods, a major baking company, purchased the Wonder brand and brought it back to shelves. The resurrection spoke volumes. Even if Wonder wasn't America's daily loaf anymore, it still held symbolic power. Its survival proved that while tastes change and markets shift, certain brands are too deeply woven into the cultural fabric to truly disappear. Wonder Bread as nostalgia. Today, Wonder Bread survives less as the centerpiece of the American diet and more as a cultural artifact. For older generations, it evokes memories of childhood lunches, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and TV dinners in suburban kitchens. For younger generations, it's often a curiosity, an artifact from a time when bread was softer, simpler, and less scrutinized. In a world obsessed with artisan sourdough, organic grains, and gluten-free options, Wonder Bread almost feels rebellious in its simplicity. It's unapologetically soft, squishy, and white, a product of its time, clinging to relevance by being exactly what it has always been. Some consumers now buy it not out of necessity but for nostalgia, recreating recipes from childhood or introducing their kids to the bread they grew up with. Its iconic balloon packaging remains instantly recognizable, a symbol of continuity in a world of change. For many, just seeing it on a shelf is enough to spark memories of a different America, simpler, or at least imagined that way. Wonder has become less about feeding bodies and more about feeding memory, reminding people of when life seemed predictable and stable. In that sense, it endures not just as bread but as a piece of living history. Wonder Bread and the symbolism of whiteness. The story of Wonder Bread can't be told without addressing the symbolism of whiteness, not just as a color, but as a cultural ideal. For much of the 20th century, white bread symbolized refinement, modernity, and even status. Eating white bread was a sign that you weren't poor, that you could afford industrial progress over rough, old-fashioned grains. But by the late 20th and early 21st centuries, this symbolism had inverted. White bread became associated with being overly processed, unhealthy, and cheap. Whole grains, once peasant food, became markers of sophistication and wellness. Wonder Bread thus mirrors America's shifting values. What was once seen as the pinnacle of progress became shorthand for what progress had overlooked. The cultural legacy of wonder. Bread wonder. Bread's importance goes far beyond its nutritional profile. It became a metaphor in politics, literature, and art. White bread became slang for blandness, conformity, or suburban mediocrity. Songs, books, and comedians used Wonder Bread as shorthand for mainstream America. And yet, there's affection in that criticism. For every person mocking Wonder Bread as empty calories, there's another reminiscing about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut diagonally by mom. Wonder Bread became both a target and a treasure, mocked for what it represented, but loved for what it reminded people of. In this way, Wonder Bread transcended food. It became a cultural mirror, reflecting America's hopes, fears, and contradictions. The modern era, reinvention and resilience. Today, Wonder Bread competes in a radically different food landscape. Consumers demand transparency, health-conscious products, and artisanal authenticity. And yet, Wonder still sells millions of loaves a year. Part of its survival lies in adaptation. Wonder now offers whole grain options and fortified varieties, trying to balance its nostalgic identity with modern expectations. But part of its survival is simply its name. Wonder Bread still means something to Americans. It still conjures memories, comfort, and a peculiar sense of trust. In an age of constant change, Wonder's consistency is, paradoxically, its strength. It's still soft, it's still sliced, and it's still wrapped in balloons that promise joy, even if only in memory. The story of Wonder Bread is the story of America itself. Optimistic, ambitious, sometimes naive, always evolving. From its birth in the roaring 1920s to its dominance in the 1950s, its criticism in the counterculture era, its collapse in the 2000s, and its nostalgic survival today, Wonder has been more than food. It has been a symbol of progress, purity, conformity, nostalgia, and resilience. It shows how something as simple as bread can carry the weight of an entire culture's identity. So the next time you see a loaf of Wonder Bread, don't just think of it as white bread. Think of it as a story of technology, marketing, memory, and the American dream itself. A loaf that once promised to build strong bodies in 12 ways ended up building something far bigger, a cultural legacy that will live on slice after slice,